How's it going, Twitch? Happy New Year! My name is Skull, and on behalf of East Asia Soft, welcome to today's stream. Today marks the end of our journey through If My Heart Had Wings. I've been playing this game now for half a year. I'm completely invested in it, and I just, man, I've been looking forward to this and dreading this for such a long time, because I've just grown to love these characters and this story. It's just a beautiful, beautiful game, and it's so sad, it's just so sad that it's coming to an end, and all good things must come to an end. If you want to get caught up on what has been happening, we do archive all of our live streams at youtube.com/EastAsiaSoft, so head over there and watch the series from beginning to end if you do not plan on buying the game for yourselves, although of course I highly recommend it. I know, speaking for myself, I'm definitely going to play the game several more times just to get all the endings. Man, just what a beautiful game. Also worth noting that the creators of this game are publishing a new physical game this month called Love Kami Trilogy for the Nintendo Switch, so if you want to pre-order that, head over to PlayAsian and get your pre-order in. Here we go! For the final time, let's get into it. Amanea just said, whew.
お疲れ様です、先輩。
ああ、別に疲れてないぞ。夜。
何ですか？
ここは任せてもいいかな。私は外を見てくる。
ええ、そうしてください。
疲れてないのか。
葵先輩、遅いですね。
うん。
でも心配ないよ。必ず戻るって言ってたじゃん。はい。糖分が足りない。姉さん、チョコ。
I have never seen Yoru with that expression before. That's funny.
はいはい、ただいま。ありがとう。あの人すごいわね。あまねさん？私、自分より頭いい人初めて見たわ。本当に天才なのかもしれない。どうなの？いけそう？ええ、多分。あの人が外でちょうどいい場所を見つけてきてくれたら。ただ、まだ裏付けは完璧じゃないわ。休憩終わり。もうひと頑張り。ん？あ、葵先輩！ん？葵！
Almost without realizing, I had returned to the hangar where everyone was waiting. Ageha ran up to me as soon as I came in.
こっちはいけそうだよ、葵。そっちはどうだった？葵？
Saying nothing, I handed over Isuka's flight log.
何これ？
She said she didn't have any reason to hold on to this any longer.
それってどういう？
She's decided to quit school in the middle of summer vacation.
え？今、なんて。
After hearing about Kotori's accident, her mother collapsed. She said she doesn't want to worry her parents anymore. She said she's done. As I spoke, I could feel tears welling up in my eyes. I took in a deep breath and pulled myself together. Where's Amane? I was planning to give Isuka's flight log to her. It wasn't something I should be holding on to.
今、外に出てる。
Ah, okay. I'll go look for her. Starting off with angst. A strong wind was blowing outside. Due to its shape, it wasn't unusual for strong winds to blow on Windmill Hill. But this time was different. One of the signs that the morning glory was coming was unstable air currents and strong winds. Looking at the sky, I couldn't see anything like the cloud formation, but still, it did feel like it was coming. I sat down on the grass. I had no real intention of going to look for Amane. I just couldn't stay inside. I had to get out. The wind noisily ran up the grassy plain. This was where it had all began. I had returned home after losing the ability to ride. Then the first time I came to this hill, I had met Kotari. Her wheelchair had a flat tire, and I had helped her. That's how it all had started. A year had passed since then. We had lived together, and had both looked to the sky for our hopes and dreams. We didn't always agree, but we always looked up to the same sky together. Please don't make her chase her dreams that regular children have. He says that not even knowing what his daughter feels when she looks up at the sky.
Watashi, 飛びたい。モーニンググローリーを、雲の回廊を渡りたい。そうしたら取り戻せる気がするの。未来が、そう、未来。私がなくした一番大きなもの。もしモーニンググローリーを飛べれば取り戻せる気がするの。
Could Kotari find happiness by going back to her parents' home? Giving up on her dream? Throwing away her future? There's no way she'd be happy. I wished I could bring her back right now. But doing so would completely disrupt Kotari's family. This is my family's problem. But if I don't go home, my family will entirely fall apart. I can't let that happen. Kotari had to decide what was most important to her, and she had chosen her family. I just want her to come back. But I guess I'm just being selfish. I looked down at the paper airplane that I was given along with Isuka's flight log. It was a completely normal paper airplane. There was nothing special about how it was made, and there was nothing written on it anywhere. She had given up on flying, but not the desire to fly. Was that the message? I picked up the paper airplane and threw it. It glided quietly through the night sky. Floating in the wind, it flew towards the bottom of the hill and disappeared into the darkness. It flies well. Kotari definitely made it. After watching the paper plane disappear, I saw someone coming up from the bottom of the hill. It was Amane.
これを投げたのは君かい?
She was holding the paper airplane in her hand. She came over to me and stared out over the lake.
いい風が出てきたな。
Yeah.
ちょうどいい場所を見つけた。飛べるぞ、葵くん。
I wonder.
なんだか張り合いがないぞ。どうしたんだ?
I don't know. I don't know what the right thing to do is. Amane gave me a perplexed look. I still hadn't told her about Kotari. Of course she'd be confused. Sorry, I'm talking crazy. Forget it.
正しいとか間違ってるとか、私はないと思う。
Huh?
それを決められるのは自分だけだ。だってそうだろ？誰かにとって正しくても他の誰かにとって間違ってるってことはたくさんあるんだ。だから僕は僕にとって何が正しいか他人に決められるのなんてごめんだね。迷った時は自分の心に耳を澄ませるといい。 あんたの正しい答えはそこにある。
Well. I stared blankly as Amane talked somewhat profoundly.
イスカが私に言った言葉だ。驚いたよ。それまで私はどんな問題にも正しい答えは一つだと思っていたから。天才だろ、イスカは。
Yeah, seems like it.
だから君も自分の心に耳を傾けるといい。私はバカだから今もあまり上手にできないんだけどな。
Sounding a little embarrassed, Amane handed the paper airplane to me.
さて、フライトプランを練り直すか。
She stood up and stretched before heading back towards the hangar. As I watched her walk away, it was like a light bulb turned on in my head. Suddenly, I remembered everything from that moment. The first time I had met Kotari. A white paper airplane had gently flown over my head. It was almost as if one of the turbine blades had detached and was flying through the air. I had picked up the plane, climbed up the hill, and then... I met her. A girl in a wheelchair with a sense of innocence about her. She was staring wistfully up at the sky, running her fingers through her hair as the breeze blew through it. She sat right in front of me in a white blouse with the blue sky and the turbines in the background. It was like looking at a painting. "So you got it," she had said as tears welled up in her eyes. She was the one that had thrown the paper plane. What had she said next? If someone could get my SOS, maybe they would come for me. SOS! My body trembled. I looked at the perfectly plain paper airplane. Could this really be an SOS? Was this Kotari calling out for help? That probably wasn't it. I probably just wanted to see her so bad that I was connecting imaginary dots in my head. However, if I'm right, I'm going to have to hurry. I stood up and ran in the opposite direction of the secret base. I pulled out my cell phone as I ran.
もしもし、葵？
Can I count on you to prepare the glider?
いいけど、どうしたの急に？
I'm going to go get Kotari. Agea?
そう来なくちゃ。こっちは任せて。だから絶対連れてきてよね。
As soon as I hung up, I called Tatsuya. Come on, Tatsuya, pick up. The call wasn't getting through. I hung up and made a call to a different number.
はい、もしもし、ハバネです。
Sorry for calling so late. This is Aoi.
水瀬さん？
Is Kotari there? I asked, almost completely out of breath. Hibari was deathly silent.
実はもう父が迎えに来て。
I thought he was coming tomorrow.
小鳥ちゃんの気が変わる前に連れて帰りたかったんだと思います。
When was this?
ついさっきです。まだ5分も経ってません。
I see. Thanks. Before hanging up, I remembered there was something else I had to talk about. Can you come here now?
私がですか？
Yes. I want you to see what Kotari was aiming for. Please. Whether or not Kotari would fly, I wanted her sister to see. I wanted her to see what Kotari and what all of us had been aiming for.
わかりました。
guess that didn't work. Tatsuya didn't seem to be answering. I wanted to ask Tatsuya to use his car, and taxis didn't run at this hour out in the countryside. Guess there's only one thing left to do. Just to be safe, I left a message for Tatsuya. When I was ready, I put a hand on my most prized possession. Alright, let's do this!
葵が小鳥を迎えに行くって。本当ですか？小鳥のことは葵に任せておけばいいと思う。必ず連れてきてくれるはずだから。
ただいま。
ちょうどいいところに。どうでしたか？
ああ、バッチリだ。
となると、あとはグライダーですね。そっちは私が行ってくるわ。朝ちゃんは発行準備の方をお願い。人手がいるから適当に集めてきて。
This is exciting. It's all coming together.
ああ、あとライトも必要だ。懐中電灯か何かを一緒に集めてくれ。
ラジャーです。ここからが正念場よ。忙しくなるぞ。
I sprinted down the southbound road next to the lake on my bike. They wouldn't even have gone 100 kilometers yet. No reason to conserve my energy. I needed to go about 30 kilometers. I couldn't go full speed, but I still was going very fast. If I couldn't catch Kotsugi there, I wouldn't be able to catch her at all. The goal was Saza... Oh boy. Saza Nabiobashi Bridge, directly located south of here. The bridge was connected to an island in the middle of the lake, and the way it dipped down made it look like a giant wave. Even ignoring the beautiful landscape, due to its convenience, any Tokyo-bound car would definitely cross the bridge. I calculated how much time I had left. It would take just under an hour by car from Hibari's house to the bridge. Since it was late at night, they could be speeding, but I doubted Kotsugi's father would be that dangerous. It seemed likely he would be obeying the speed limit and driving safely. It was about 30 kilometers to the bridge from Flying Fish Manor. I was much closer than they were. If I hurry, I can catch them. I pedaled as hard as I could.
おっせえよ、何やってたんだよ。
これ用意してたら遅くなっちゃって。
ガスバーナー。お前それで何する気だ？
Well, there's that is one solution.
決まってんでしょ。鍵を焼き切るんだよ。
焼き切るんだよじゃねえよ、危ねえ女だな。
I'm on his side.
何言ってるのよ。叩き壊すより野蛮じゃないし、音も小さくて済むでしょうが。
いいのかホタル、こんなことに首突っ込んで。
青兄たちのためだから。
まあそういう俺も巻き込まれてるしな。
You are all gonna get suspended.
さあ行くよ。時間がもったいない。葵たちが戻ってくる前に準備整えなきゃいけないんだから。
Where did they get their hands on a blowtorch? That's what I want to know. That's a very good question. With no answer.
というわけなんです。皆さん、ご協力をお願いします。おお、ついに飛ぶのね。どうしますか、ゆかさん。
もちろん手伝わせてもらうわ。そのために早めに帰ってきたんですもの。
This is new music.
私もいいよ、朝ちゃん。ありがとうございます、皆さん。いやー、みんなにメールしといてよかったわ。それと懐中電灯か何か、手で持てる明かりがあると嬉しいんですけど。どんなのでもいいの？はい、なるべく明るいもので。それならあれがあるじゃないですか、ゆかさん。
あれ？あれでよければ余ってるけど。
夏の野外ライブが雨で中止になっちゃいましたもんね。
そうなのよ。あの時は本当に悔しかったわ。私がどれだけ楽しみにしていたか。
Oh, that's the saddest thing I've heard all day.
朝ちゃん、人でこれだけで足りるの？なんだったらもっと呼べるけど。本当ですか？できればあと10人くらいは。おいさ、連絡も回してみるね。けど夜遅いし大丈夫なんですか？
Nobody has slept, by the way.
多分ね。ソアリング部がついに飛ぶって言ったらみんな来ると思うよ。そうなんですか？
みんな結構期待してたからね。すごいことをやろうとしてるみたいだって。
やっぱロマンがあるもんね、空飛ぶのって。みんな頑張ってたから。皆さん。もしもし、あかりちゃん？ごめん、寝てた？え、起きてた？そう、それ。察しがいいね。うひひ、さてはお主。風がどんどん強くなってる。
これは計算した以上だな。
あんまり風速がありすぎるとかえって離陸が難しくなるんじゃ。
そういやそうだな。
Got the two smartest people in the school right here, so
みんな
they'll figure something out.
うまくやってくれてるかしら。
大丈夫さ。きっとうまくいくよ。みんないい子たちだからな。
根拠になってませんが。けど私もそんな気がします。
小鳥、寝てていいんだよ。
Dad's car drove quietly through the night roads. We were going home to Tokyo.
すまないな、こんな時間に。少しでも早く母さんに会わせたかったんだ。今から帰ればちょうど朝には戻れるだろう。
分かってるよ。私も早くお母さんに会いたい。
母さん、小鳥が帰ったらきっとすぐに元気になってご馳走作ってくれるぞ。小鳥は何が食べたい？
オムライスかな。
コロッケじゃないのか。小鳥好きだっただろう。
コロッケはね、自分で作れるようになったから。今度は私がお母さんに作って食べさせてあげたい。
This is only the second time we've actually seen properly from her perspective.
おお、それは楽しみだな。もちろんお父さんの分もあるんだろう。
どうしよっかななんて。
Dad laughed at that. It wasn't forced at all. He seemed genuinely happy. That made me feel a little better. Our little chit-chat ended as quickly as it had started. We were left alone to the sound of the car moving down the road. I opened my phone to try and distract myself from the silence. We have seen the signs. The morning glory is coming tomorrow morning. I stared blankly at the message. The last message from the person I loved.
危ないな。深夜だからって無茶な運転をして。大丈夫か、小鳥？
平気。
ああいう輩がいるから交通事故がなくならないんだ。まったく。
窓開けていい？
エアコンが強かったかい？
そうじゃないの。風に当たりたいだけ。
After opening the window, I looked up at the sky. It was pitch black. In that pitch black sky, though, I knew the cloud corridor was slowly but surely being made. The sign. The sign of the morning glory. The sky I had been longing for all this time. If I was in this town for just one more day, no, just until the morning, I would be able to see it. However, this car was taking me further and further away from Kazugara every second.
今どのあたり？
もう少ししたらさざ波大橋が見えてくる。ほら、前に通った大きな橋。覚えてないか？
ああ、あの綺麗な橋。
A large bridge that spanned over a lake. That was the exit out of Kazugara. Soon, I'd be leaving the town that I had grown to love so much. Can you do that? Quit school, go back home, and live like that? A chill went down my spine as I remembered those words. That was the cruelest thing that he had ever said to me. I couldn't remember when he had said this to me. Today, or even a year ago. Either way, it was the cruelest thing.
ねえ、お父さん。
なんだい？
なんでもない。
I'm completely different from a year ago. I have tons of memories now. In my heart, there's an album of memories of all the days I spent with everyone. I might not have a future, but I can relive those memories just by opening that album. So, I'll be fine. This is okay. Because if I don't do this, Mom and Dad will...
私頑張ったんだよ。お父さん頑張って上手になって本当にグライダーを操縦したんだよ。
ああ。
何百メートルも高いところに上がって、それですごく楽しかったんだよ。
楽しいことならまた見つかる。もっと安全な遊びが。
違うんだよ。そうじゃ、グライダーで飛ぶ楽しさは他じゃ変えられないんだよ。
We've had the same conversation over and over. My father just continued to drive quietly with a sad look on his face.
ほら、見えてきたぞ。あの橋が。
お願い、お父さん。
小鳥。
He looked at me again with sorrow.
辛いだろうけれど、それは今だけだ。向こうで暮らせば、きっとすぐ忘れられる。
Would I really? Could I really throw away my dreams and live like nothing had ever happened?
友達だって向こうでまたできるさ。
The car slowly carried me towards the bridge. Once I crossed it, there'd be no going back. I was leaving the town that I had once hated, the town that I now loved. Suddenly, I saw something in the side mirror. Is that a bicycle?
お父さん、止めて。
え？なんだって？
いいから止めて、お願い。
バカを言うな。こんなところで一体どうして？
Just a little more. I was almost at the top of the hill. Once I got there, a long downhill ride was waiting for me. The bicycle was in good condition, but my legs were not. The tailwind helped me move, but it was a miracle that I was able to ride this far. Only a bit more? Come on! It had taken more time than I thought. But if I just made it up to the top... Finally, I reached the peak of the hill. I tried to catch my breath as I pedaled across the flat hilltop. If I went just a little further, I would start flying downhill. Right before my eyes was the lake and the bridge going right across it. There it is! I picked up my pace. Using all the energy I had left, I pedaled down the hill. I shifted my weight forward and accelerated. Downhill. Tearing down through the wind was an incredible thrill. I knew if I fell, I'd probably die, but I wasn't scared. On my way down the hill, I passed a slow-moving car. This was a car that had past me going downhill just a few minutes ago. I kept pedaling. The bicycle kept accelerating. The bridge begins at the bottom of the hill, and there they are! Kotari! Perfect timing. The familiar station wagon passed through an intersection not far ahead of me. The final sprint. The hill ended, and I pedaled across the flat land after the station wagon. Kotari! I pushed with every ounce of my body and swung my bicycle in front of the station wagon. The brakes squealed as the car came to a halt. As soon as I saw it stop, I hit the brakes on my bicycle. Then, I fell to the ground with my bicycle. I laid upon the asphalt trying to catch my breath.
君、大丈夫か?
Kotori's father got out of the car. I pulled up my body and struggled to stand on my shaking knees.
ん? 君は?
Kotori! Seeing her face and feeling a relief come over me that nearly sent my knees buckling down again. Her father came over to help me up, but I grabbed the bridge handrail and lifted myself up before he could. Kotori looked at me, unable to believe what was right before her eyes.
どうしてここに
I pulled a crumbled piece of paper that, until moments ago, was in the shape of an airplane and showed it to Kotori. I saw your SOS! Kotori's eyes began to swell with tears. Mr. Hamade, please! Please! Don't take Kotori away from here!
それを言うために追いかけてきたのか?
Please!
言ったはずです。これは私たち家族の問題だと。
I heard about your wife, about her collapsing.
それを知っていて、まだそんなことを。
Because I couldn't let this happen to Kotori. You told me on the phone, remember? How Kotori lying was you was your fault. Kotori doesn't hate you. Even now, she still deeply cares about you. Despite all that, she lied to you and left the house. Don't you understand now why she did that? I was basically pleading at this point.
だからこうしてその間違いを正し、また元の家族に戻ろうとしているんじゃないか。
Do you want her to lie to you again? This paper airplane was an SOS from Kotori. This was the only way she could ask for help. You have to try to understand what she wants. She never said any of that by phone or text. She was trying to say her goodbyes and go back home. Except for this paper airplane. She couldn't hide her true feelings. That would have been betraying herself. Folding this paper airplane was an SOS from Kotori's heart. Kotori said that if she was able to fly through the morning glory, she would be able to get her future back.
未来?
Right. whether or not she believes she'll be able to realize her dreams in the future. You said it yourself, didn't you? How she couldn't have dreams that normal people have.
それは本当のことだ。あなたにだって分かっているでしょう。小鳥が普通の人のように何かをするのがどれほど大変か。
I silently nodded. Of course I knew that. I had been beside her all this time.
小鳥が身に余るほどの目標を叶えようとした時、どれほどの困難が待っているか。きっと傷つき、苦しみ、大きな挫折を味わうに決まっている。
The heart-wrenching way in which he spoke made it seem as though he'd seen Kotori like this many times before. He must have. He'd seen his daughter trying her best, but he was the one who had given up. So what?
何？
Kotori isn't afraid of those things at all. Even after the accident, after losing the ability to walk, after all that, she still wants to fly. Doesn't that mean anything?
しかしそれは。
She's a klutz, a crybaby, scared of strange things, and a bit reckless at times. But she has never turned her back on her goal. She's been courageously pressing forward this whole time. Aren't you just stopping her to prevent your own fears, your own worries?
え？
That's not taking care of your daughter. Kotori interrupted what I was saying. I snapped back to my senses and shut my mouth. However, her father already knew what I was trying to say. Regardless, what I had said, as honest as it may have been, was surely intensely painful for him to hear. If you're going to take Kotori back to Tokyo, there's nothing I can do to stop you. That was a problem of the family. Kotori is still only a student. She can't live completely separately from her parents. But before that, can't you let her fly? Just one last time. Let us show you that what we have all been working towards hasn't been for nothing. Please.
お父さん
Kotori began to get out of the passenger seat by herself. Unable to use her legs, she was hanging onto the door as she began to fall out of the car.
小鳥、
He ran over and caught his daughter.
君、車椅子を。
Okay. I unloaded the wheelchair from the back of the station wagon. Kotori's father gently sat her into it. Watching him do it, I could tell that he was a caring parent. As she was being held in her father's arms, she put a hand to his chest and said,
お父さん、私本当に飛んだんだよ。空を雲に手が届きそうなくらい高く、
ああ、
すごく気持ちよくて楽しくて、そこじゃ私は体が不自由な女の子じゃなくなるの。
でもそれはたくさんの人たちが小鳥のために手助けをしてくれたからだろ。
But it's not like Kotori is special. I replied to her father instead of her. No one can fly a glider by themselves. Sorry about that noise, guys. You need someone to man the winch, hold the wingtips, do the maintenance, building it. So many people are needed to make it fly.
ねえお父さん、飛ばせて。私飛びたいの。最後に一度だけでいい。そしたらおとなしく家へ帰るから。
小鳥。
Looking at his beloved daughter, Mr. Habane shook his head.
お父さん、私今飛ばないと一生自分に嘘をついて暮らしていくことになる。もう二度と自分の翼では飛べなくなっちゃう。この先ずっとただ見上げて暮らすなんて嫌なの。
Her father quietly closed his eyes. Then, quietly,
組み立て
始次第すぐ飛ぶからね。風強いから気をつけて。翼になるべく正面から風が当たらないようにね。はい。お手伝いの人も気をつけてくださいね。
人がいっぱいでなんかお祭りみたいだね。
あなたが集めたんでしょ。
だってみんな見たいだろうと思って。あかりちゃんだってそうでしょ。
そりゃこんな面白いこと見逃す手はないわ。
だよね。
夜食のおにぎりできました。手の空いた人から食べてってください。
梅干し、おかか、塩昆布あります。
俺おっかか。ホタルは何にする？
じゃあ梅干し。皆さんもどうぞ。
Everyone is here. This is it.
夜明けまであとどのくらい？
This is it.
54分。
ギリギリね。
パイロットが届けばね。
組み立て完了しました。係留しっかりした？はい。よし、じゃあ皆さん集まってください。これから発行手順を説明しますので。いいですか？ゴム柵を引っ張る役の人はあさちゃんチームとよるちゃんチームに分かれてもらいます。私が発行準備開始って言ったらゴム柵を持ってください。その後は一歩ずつあさちゃん、よるちゃんと歩幅を合わせて引いていってもらいます。で、グライダーが離陸した後なんですが、
あれはアゲハ先輩、葵先輩たち到着しました。
I unsteadily lowered myself from the back of Tatsuya's truck. My knees were still shaking. That sprint had used up all of my energy. I could hardly use my legs. I guess I need to start training again. Hey, Hageha! Could you help Kotori get down?
じゃあ手伝って。
Tatsuya had heard the voice message I left him and was able to bring Kotori and I here in his truck. After all, Kotori's father wasn't entirely happy with this. Thanks for coming, Tatsuya.
いや、俺こそすぐ電話に出られなくてすまなかったな。
おかえりなさい、小鳥先輩。
ただいま。たくも心配させやがって。
ごめんね、みんな。
After getting into her wheelchair, Kotori came over to me.
足大丈夫？
Yeah, they're just a little tired. But it feels like I could barely move, so I'm going to have to ask you to pilot. I said it half seriously, trying to motivate Kotori and make her smile.
小鳥、ちゃんと元気そうだな。
あまねちゃん。
Kotori's mood suddenly picked up when she saw Amane running towards us, waving.
待ってたんだぞ、二人が帰ってくるのを。
ごめんね、待たせちゃって。本当だわ。どれだけ私たちにやきもきしたか。
Behind Amane and Yoru's wry comments, I could also tell that they were relieved. Hey, what's up with all these people? A crowd of people had gathered around our secret base, about 50 people or so. The crowd was growing more and more excited. It felt like I had walked into a group of tourists.
花子さんが声をかけてくれたんです。皆さん、私たちのフライトを見てみたいって。この人たち全部？期待されてますよ、私たち。
Kotori looked at everyone, dumbfounded.
はいはい、 考えにふけってる時間はないよ。天音先輩、フライトプランの変更点を2人に説明してやってください。
おお、そうだった。
Ageha left us with Amane and went off to the crowd. She began to explain all sorts of things to them.
ねえ、滑走路へ行かなくていいの？
Huh? Oh yeah, I forgot. I hadn't told Kotari about the broken winch. The truth is...
飛びをかめ、許すまじ。でもそれならどうやって飛ぶの？
ここから飛ぶんだ。
Amane spread her arms out wide.
この丘から。
どうやって？
Amane began explaining the takeoff procedure to Kotari, who looked confused.
マジなのそれ？
ああ、マジだ。
Kotari gave me a worried look. Don't worry, if Amane says we can do it, we can.
そうね。あまねちゃんがそう言うなら大丈夫よね。2人ともコックピットに乗って。
Okay?
了解。
After preparing our parachutes, we got into the cockpit. We checked the operation system.
右エルロン OK、 左エルロン問題なし。
My pre-flight nerves were slowly increasing. Then, suddenly...
小鳥ちゃん。
Hibari came running to the cockpit.
ひばりね、どうしてここに？
I asked her to come. I wanted her to see what you were trying to do.
お姉ちゃんここで見てるから。だから気をつけてね。
Hibari looked a little pale. She really seemed like she wanted to stop Kotari. But she didn't say anything else and let her little sister go. Kotari smiled and gave her a thumbs up.
任せて。私のかっこいいところ見せてあげる。
Hibari gave a strange smile to her little sister and walked away from the cockpit. Ageha then came over to talk to us.
発行の手順は天音先輩から聞いたよね。ゴム柵が伸びきったら私が合図を出すからブレーキを離して。そしたら走り出すから。了解。かなり難しい離陸になるけど大丈夫？
Ageha asked in an uneasy tone.
いけると思う。イメージはもうつかめたわ。わかった。信じてるよ、小鳥。
Saying that, Ageha closed the canopy. She flashed me a look. It seemed as if she was asking me to take care of Kotari should anything happen. I silently nodded in response. As the dome closed over the cockpit, all noise seemed to drift far away. It was just the two of us now. Kotari put her hand to her chest and took a deep breath. She seemed nervous.
迎えに来てくれてありがとう。
It was a faint whisper, but I could still hear it. I hesitated a bit and then replied to her. Honestly, I don't know if this is going to go well.
私も。
We still didn't have her father's understanding. We told him how we felt, then basically just ran off together to come here.
でも
Kotari looked up at the sky. It was only a little before dawn. The sky was slowly brightening and the silhouette of the giant cloud had come into view.
今しかないから。
Yep. This was the first time the Morning Glory had appeared in Kazugara in 27 years. If we miss this chance, who knows when we'll have another. I hope they brought a camera.
発行準備開始します。皆さん配置についてください。
As Ageha started issuing instructions, the crowd of people began to move into place. They broke up into two groups and readied the launch bungee. Ageha fastened her end of the launch bungee to the hooks underneath the glider. The connecting piece was located at the middle of the bungee cord. From there, it would be stretched out to the left and right. On either side, led by Asa and Yoru, two large groups of people lined up and gripped the bungee cord. The launch bungee wouldn't be stretched in the direction the glider was going to. They had to pull it diagonally away from the glider on each side. This way, the people pulling on the bungee wouldn't get hit by the glider. To ensure the glider went straight, each side needed to pull the cord at the exact same angle and use the same amount of power. Asa and Yoru were assigned this duty because as twins they had almost the same physique, as their strides would sync up well. Ageha tapped on the canopy. I nodded, and Ageha responded with a thumbs up. It was as if she was telling us, good luck. The launch bungee was pulled back one step. Another step. The bungee was slowly being stretched. In the meantime, the glider remained firmly on the ground. Wheel stoppers were in place and the tires were hooked into them. When Kotali released the brake, the tires would come free from them and move. Everyone became tense as the launch bungee was being stretched. From the canopy, I could see Hibari watching us with a worried look on her face.
お父さんにも見てほしかったな。
I think we were able to explain Kotali's feelings to her father. He hadn't given his blessings, however. He was probably terrified. The memories of his daughter and the hot air balloon accident must still haunt him. The wind rolling up the hill became stronger and stronger. It began to make the wings tremble. The glider was shaking as if it was ready to fly any moment. Concentrate, hold on to the yoke tightly. Don't think about anything other than flying right now.
了解。
Then, at that moment, a single station wagon arrived at the top of the hill. The car stopped in front of the secret base, and a man in a suit climbed out of the driver's side.
小鳥、
お父さん。
Age had stopped her counting once she saw Kotari's father. Had he come to stop the flight? But there was no sign of him coming towards the cockpit. Instead, he stopped at a distance and just watched us. Hibari walked over and joined him. Ageha looked over to us as if she didn't know if she should continue or not. Kotali released the brake. The bungee was let loose and the glider started to move. As it ran down the hill, it started to go faster and faster. Kotali! Kotali pulled the yoke back. The wings began to lift up and the glider started to fly.
おお、
よし行け。飛んでください。
It was only a few feet, but it was just high enough. Kotali instantly returned the yoke to neutral and pushed it forward slightly. The glider began to fly parallel to the hill, and it looked like it was sliding down.
待機速度は十分。離陸成功だ。
The glider flew parallel to the hill and coasted along smoothly, picking up speed as it went. It cut right through the headwind. We were at the center of Windmill Hill. A natural path was made for us from all the wind blowing into the crescent-shaped hill. The strength of that headwind was enough to lift the glider.
やった！父さん！嘘みたい！あんな方法で！
Don't get excited just yet. We had pointed the glider downwards in order to take up speed. That made us lose a lot of altitude. Now we needed to get back up. Otherwise, we'd never get to the top of the clouds.
分かってるって。皆さん！急いで移動してください！すぐに戻ってきますからね！ライトをまだもらってない人、取りに来てください！お父さん、ひばりさん。
ん？
どうしたの、朝ちゃん。これよかったらどうぞ。サイリウム？
どうしてこんなものを？
To help them land, I guess. The glider had made it down the hill safely and was heading towards the lake. In the pre-dawn darkness, the lake looked like a big black hole. We were flying right over it. The speed was good enough, but our altitude wasn't right just yet. Kotobi, make a U-turn.
了解。
Kotobi tilted the yoke sideways. The glider began to turn. Watch out for the altitude loss. Speed as well.
分かってる。
Being careful not to lose speed, Kotobi made a sharp turn. However, there was still a loss.
速度足りるかな。
Thanks to the ground effect, we won't descend too much, I think. But we were above the lake. On the off chance we did crash, it wouldn't be pretty. Our speed hadn't decreased that much, however, we now had tailwind. As our speed decreased, so did our ability to rise.
目標は？
Can't see it yet. Windmill Hill, which was where we had launched from, was now nothing but a silhouette. We could barely make out the ridge line from the dim light from the sky, and telling the distance was nearly impossible. Even worse, since it was pitch black in every direction, it was hard to determine which way we were going as well. Don't get confused by what you can't see. Pay attention to the instruments. When the range of sight is limited by thick fog or clouds, using the instruments to navigate is the only option. If you relied on your eyes alone in poor visibility, illusions could cause you to lose track of your true positioning. However, since Kotobi didn't have much flight experience, she still wasn't used to reading the instruments. I supported Kotobi as we waited for our target to appear. At that moment,
あれ見て、青い。
a small light twinkled within the darkness. As we moved forward, we saw a line of lights going up the hill.
ゆかさんたちだ。
Everyone who had gathered was holding a light, making a pathway for us. This was another part of Amane's flight plan. Creating this trail of light was another reason we needed all these people. Once the target was determined, Kotobi made her way to it. The glider was making its way back to Windmill Hill, where it launched off from. We're nearing the hill. Raise the pitch.
了解。
Kotobi pulled on the yoke. At the same time, we felt the glider being lifted from below.
リフトに乗ったみたい。
The glider was on the updraft. We began to rise higher and higher, fueled by the strong wind. This updraft was different from a thermal. The wind, A slope drift was a strong upward sloping wind coming from between the hill and the mountains. This was the wind we were using when we took off and was the same wind that powered the turbines on the hill. The glider continued to accelerate and rise higher. We soared over the many small lights that were down below us. We couldn't make them out individually, but they were the lights our friends held for us.
光が揺れてる。手を振ってくれてるんだ。
Watch out! You're going to run into a windmill. If we followed the trail of lights, we wouldn't hit the windmill. However, who knows what would happen if there was a mistake. Hi, Leandro. Happy New Year. Welcome to the stream. Riding on the slope lift, the glider slipped past the group of windmills. Then, in the blink of an eye, we flew over the hill. We began to rise higher and higher, heading towards the breaking dawn.
近くで見るとすごい迫力だったね。あんなにスピードが出ているものなのね。
ちっくしょう。なんかむちゃくちゃかっこよかったんだけど、あいつら。
青兄はいつもかっこいいよ。あーちゃん、これもういいの？
ありがとうホタル。皆さんもご協力ありがとうございました。グライダーは無事離陸に成功しました。ゆかさん、サイリウムありがとうございました。おかげで超助かりました。役に立ってよかったわ。でもなんでこんなにいっぱいサイリウム持ってたんですか？ゆかさん、某アイドルグループの追っかけやってるから。
コンサートの必需品だからね。1回のコンサートで20本以上使う時もあるし、いつもストックしてあるのよ。
はあ、なるほど。
Very
あれ
important.
を小鳥が操縦しているのか。
そうみたい。お父さんとひばりさんもお手伝いしてくださってありがとうございました。
いや、私たちは。
あっちに夜食のおにぎりあるんで、どうぞ食べてってください。
お嬢さん、小鳥のためにこんなに大勢の人が協力してくださったのですか？
え
あの子を飛ばせてやるために。
え。いやー、それはどうかな。別に小鳥のためってわけじゃないかも。多分みんな自分がやりたいからやってるんです。うちの学校そういう物好き多いし。私だってそうですよ。小鳥が飛ぶところを見たかっただけです。
はあ。
お父さん言ってましたよね。空を飛んだからなんだと言うんだって。今飛び立っていた2人を見て何も感じませんでしたか？
いや、それは。
感じたと思うわ。にひひ。じゃあ期待しててください。これからもっとすごいことが起こりますから。
After flying off high from Windmill Hill, we were able to see our next goal, Mount Tsukubai, in the distance. At this altitude, we should be able to make it. Be careful of crosswinds, though. The current is rough. Go to the...
了解。
What's wrong? Are you tired?
違うよ。さっきの光の中にお父さんもいたのかなって。
Ah, yeah, I wonder too. But he probably saw us flying, though. That's why he came, right?
そうだといいな。
Hey, the nose is descending. Be careful. You want to show him what you can do, right?
この1年で私も成長したんだってところを見せたい。
Mount Tsukubei was coming closer and closer. This was the moment of truth of our flight plan. Our next goal was to ride a giant current known as a lee wave. If we could do that, we could reach the top of the clouds. The problem was, how do we catch a lee wave? A lee wave is a wave of air formed by wind going over a mountain. They can be found at high altitudes and have a rotor-like turbulence below them. By entering the upper part of the turbulence, it should be possible to ride the lee wave upwards. But because the turbulence is incredibly unstable, it's a difficult task to manage. Looks like we're going into this unrehearsed. Realizing what I said, Kotori braced herself. Originally, we had planned to practice this. If only that accident hadn't happened.
見て、葵。
The eastern sky was becoming brighter and brighter. It would soon be dawn. Let's hurry! I was wondering when he would show up. Yeah, my thoughts exactly.
何何？うわ、ここで来るのかよ。
貴様ら、こんなところで何をしている？
あのですね、先生。これは
ソアリング部には活動停止を言い渡したはずだぞ。
まあそうなんですが、うわ、どうしよう。何何？どうしたの？
飛岡先
くごい。お前、生徒会長のくせにどうして止めない？
生、彼らが行っているのはただの部活動です。止める理由がありません。
何をバカな。こいつらには活動停止を命じてある。
初耳ですがそれにお言葉ですが、飛岡先生の一存で部活動を制限するような権限はお持ちでなかったと思いますが。
何？
ですので我々生徒会としましてはどうすることもできません。
He is not going to be happy.
なら、こいつらが破損させた体育倉庫の鍵はどうなる？
それも初耳ですが、何か証拠が？
証拠ならそこにグライダーが。
グライダー？そんなのどこにあるんですか？
ここにはそんなのないよね。
貴様ら、調べればすぐにわかることだ。覚悟しろよ。
He's going to blow a fuse if he keeps that up.
自分だってうんち
Oh my goodness, look at Yoru's face.
あれだって調べれば犯人がわかるかもしれないわね。
私たち処分を受ける覚悟はできてます。だから今日だけは見逃してください。
できるわけないだろう、そんなこと。
そうでもないと思いますよ。何せここには何の証拠もないのですから。
じゃあ一体ここで何をやってるんだ？
みんなで空の観察です。今から面白い雲が見られるそうなんで。
先生もご一緒に見ていかれますか？
あんまり騒ぐんじゃないぞ。いいな。
That is one really angry man.
なんとか追い返したわね。
あかりさん、ありがとうございました。
あかりさん、かっこよかったっす。
ついカッとなってしまったわ。
たまにはいいんじゃない？ストレス溜め込むのは体に毒だよ。
Right?
それより2人は今どこに？
プラン通りなら
そろそろ山岳波に乗っている頃ですけど。乗ったみたい。
Seems like it. Suddenly, just as the trembling stopped, the glider began to rise with almost no recoil at all. It felt as if gravity had disappeared.
これがベーブリフト。
As we rode the rotor wind up higher and higher, we reached a part of the sky that seemed like it had a lee wave. There was a sudden change from the rough turbulence to a complete stillness. It was peaceful, but the altimeter kept on rising. We rose higher into the sky, almost as if we were no longer flying by wind. I don't really feel any shaking at all.
怖いくらい静かだわ。
A lee wave is essentially a strong wind traveling across a mountain. The wave of displaced air is bigger than the mountain itself. The world record for the highest flying glider, which made it all the way to the stratosphere, was achieved using a lee wave. Mount Tsukube isn't a large mountain, but it was large enough for us to reach the altitude we were aiming for. However, there was no guarantee that there would be a lee wave. Their appearance is entirely dependent on the wind blowing. But today, we knew that one would be forming. Amane had calculated that one would form due to the mechanism that formed the morning glory. Lee waves were commonly known to cause unusual cloud formations. Amane's hypothesis was that the morning glory was created by the lee waves coming from Mount Tsukube. This basically means that when the morning glory appears, there will be lee waves. The pre-dawn sky, while still dark, was beginning to show some strange colors as the light came through. Before we knew it, we reached our target altitude.
見て、あれ。
Below us, we could see the silhouette of the cloud corridor. We spent a moment staring in amazement at its massive size. Wow. This wasn't the fake one that we saw a year ago. This was the real thing. Then suddenly, a ray of light came from the eastern sky. It's dawn. The morning sun broke through the darkness and began to light up the sky. Oh, this is gorgeous. Look at that. With the light, the world exploded into color. Then the giant clouds started to glow. Kotari whispered with a sense of amazement. Yeah. I didn't know what else to say. I could feel tears beginning to form in my eyes. It wasn't a feeling of joy or sorrow. A deep emotion ran through my heart and made my tears run down. I was overwhelmed and at a complete loss for words.
行くよ、葵。
Okay. Kotari pushed down on the yoke to leave the lee wave and aim us toward the cloud corridor. Oh, they even made the background perfect.
見てるわよ、姉さん。すごいね。綺麗だね。神々しいって言葉がぴったりくるわね。あれが
Perfect mixture of music too.
望月先輩がずっと追い続けていた
幻の空。
そうみたい。追いかけちゃう気持ちわかるかも。
おお、何あれ、マジすげえ。
お兄たち、もうあそこまで飛んだのかな。
あれがイスカが行きたがってた空なんだな。
ああ、葵くんたちがイスカの夢をあそこまで運んでくれた。私にはできなかったことをしてくれた。
いい後輩を持ったな、俺たち。
ああ、
綺麗ね。
ああ、しかし何なんだあの雲は。まるで奇跡でも見ているようだ。
Yeah, same here, Leandro. It's just chef's kiss. Mwah, perfect.
モーニンググローリーです。
モーニンググローリー。
風ヶ浦の空に数十年に一度現れる不思議な雲。私も本物を見たのは初めてです。
小鳥はあの雲を近くで見たいからグライダーで飛んでいったんですか？
近くで見る？いえいえ、そうじゃないですよ。飛ぶんです。あの上を。あの雲の回廊を渡るために必死で登っていったんです。
あの上を渡る？
はい。
信じられん。
多分今頃到着してるはずですよ。
今あそこに小鳥が。
Ah, what a beautiful picture! Look at that. This is what we've been waiting for this whole time. The glider soared across the corridor of heaven. It sparkled with an array of colors, with the beautiful gradients of light that the dawn was bringing. It was completely surreal. Look at how happy she is. For a moment, we were speechless. All we could do was sigh and admire the clouds.
葵、
Wow.
私たちついにやったんだね。
Yeah, we did. I had thought I would be jumping for joy at this moment. But when we actually reached it, it wasn't feelings of joy that rose inside me. I was overwhelmed by this divine sight and felt nothing but gratitude towards the miracle that it was. The glider maintained its altitude and we continued to cross the corridor of clouds in the sky. This path of clouds was created by rolling, spiral-shaped air currents. Because of those currents, a glider can soar through the sky for long periods of time. Kotori flipped the radio on.
アゲハ、聞こえる？
ことに？聞こえてるよ。ちょっと電波が悪いみたいだけど。そっちどう？今どのあたり？
乗ったよ、モーニンググローリーに。今その上を渡ってるところ。
よし、みんな、小鳥たち、今あの上にいるって。
Over the radio, we could hear everyone's cheers.
どんな気分？
なんて言ったらいいかわからない。奇跡の中にいる気分。
葵？ねえ、葵はどうなの？
It feels like I've reached heaven.
こらこら、演技のないこと言うな。
Really, though, that's what it feels like. I can't believe what I'm seeing right now.
下から見てもすごいんだもん。上からだともっとすごいんですよね。ゆっくり楽しんできてよ。
ありがとうアゲハ。みんなもありがとう。
土産話期待してるからね。通勤終わり。
As soon as the radio was turned off, the cockpit went silent. Then, wow. The sun broke above the horizon and started to light up the sky. As it rose, the top of the clouds took on a golden glow.
す
It is.
ごいこんなにすごい場所だなんて思ってなかった想像を絶するってこういうことを言うのね
No one could have imagined this. This view is outstanding.
ねえ葵
Hmm?
ここまで連れてきてくれてありがとうこの場所へ来られたことはきっと一生の誇りだわ
Don't be ridiculous. You made it here yourself.
でも葵がいなきゃ無理だったみんなも
Did you find it? What you lost?
多分
That's good to hear.
私の人生も捨てたもんじゃないね
What a beautiful picture. Our glider continued to fly on and on through the unbelievable view. On and on until the morning sun dissolved the corridor of heaven. Was that the end? That was the end! What perfect timing! What a beautiful ending! Wow. Unless there's an epilogue. There might be an epilogue. Man, what a beautiful game. I'm definitely going to replay this and get all the other endings too, but man, that was just amazing. I'm so sad to say that the physicals are all sold out, so if you want this game, you can only get it digitally. So sorry about that noise, but man, what a beautiful ending to a beautiful game. Like, I really do credit this game for igniting my... I can turn this music down just a little here. I really do credit this game for igniting my interest in visual novels, because, man, this is just amazing. This has been a beautiful, beautiful game. I don't know what else to say. Just, it really makes me want for these characters and this story to be real. It's all technically possible. The Morning Glory is an actual real thing. Oh man, what beautiful music too! I'm so glad I got the soundtrack. The Morning Glory is a real thing. I have seen actual pictures that people have taken flying above it with gliders, and it does look absolutely amazing. So technically, this story could happen, and that's just probably what makes it even more beautiful to me. It's not like it's a fantasy. It's not like it is fictional and never could be real. This could be a real story, and that's probably why I love it so much. What a... man. This is above average quality of visual novels. I agree, definitely. Of course, I haven't played too many others yet. But, oh man. Honestly, this is like possibly the only old game, old quote-unquote, that I played in 2021. Of course, it's 22 now, but I think this is the only old game that I played last year, and I definitely would place it, in terms of my most memorable games, probably higher than most of the new games that I played in 21. It is a visual novel. it's not like game of all time or anything, but this has just been a beautiful story. And man, I guess we'll see if it I guess we'll see now if there's an epilogue. I'm kind of under the impression there is, but I guess we'll see. And if that's the end, that's a beautiful ending. And of course you get many other routes that you can take if you want. That sounds like a safe. My face just went all white. Wow, what's with this? Here we go. We got an epilogue. We got an epilogue. Okay, well then I'll take your word on it, Leandro. Asa, do you think you could come over here? Here goes. 1, 2. Rustle. I hung the white sheets out on the clothesline. A few tugs and they were all set. I could bump back up the volume now. Is that you, Ageha?
こんにちは、アゲハ先輩。こんにちは。
Cheese. What did you come here for?
いやー、家にいると店の手伝いやらされるから逃げてきちゃった。
Sure, that's a good idea. Your grandma's going to get angry again. I'm just going to keep playing today until it boosts me back to the main menu. At that point, I will consider the game truly over. I think we have finished the game, or at least the Coach of the route. We've got the epilogue for that right here. I think that's all that this is. I'm expecting for this to be like a single scene or something like that.
しかしなんですな。みんなが学校行ってる時に家にいると時の流れがゆったりだよね。
I've been able to catch up on my work, so I guess that's good. One day in September, summer vacation had ended and the second semester began. But we didn't go to school because we had broken into the gym storeroom to take back the glider. The entire soaring club had been suspended.
悪い子になったみたいで、なんだかドキドキします。なんで私まで部員じゃないのに。
Guilt by association? Excluding Yoru, no one who helped out, who wasn't in the club, got suspended. Honestly, I felt it was a little anticlimactic. I was really prepared for a stricter punishment. Despite the results, it just felt like our summer vacation had been extended and we spent the time relaxing.
小鳥から連絡は？
She called yesterday. She seems to be doing well.
さあ、なんだかんだで実家の居心地はいいのかね。
That's right. Seems like she's getting on by herself these days.
ねえ、一緒に課題やろうよ。
あ、私たちもやります。私はもう終わらせたけど、ここにいても暑いだけだから付き合うわ。
Sure, no problem. I just hung out these sheets, so hold on a minute.
あいや
The white sheets popped against the pure blue sky. That day, we flew the morning glory. Looking up at the clear sky now, if I hadn't seen it myself, I never would have thought it could really have happened. A passage of cloud across the sky. We had really flown through that miracle place. The passage of cloud had melted away into the rays of the rising sun. After watching it to the very end, we returned to the runway.
Oh, おかえりなさい、二人とも。
ただいま。朝、夜、みんな。
A crowd of people had been waiting on the runway for our return.
すごかった。私感動しちゃったよ。
私もよ。すごいもの見ちゃったわ。
ゆかさん感動して泣いちゃってましたもんね。とても綺麗だった。
Everyone gathered around the cockpit. I got out first and pushed over Koto's wheelchair, which someone had prepared for us. While I was getting the wheelchair ready, Agea unbuckled Kotori and lifted her out.
お疲れ
お疲れ様。
After realizing how ordinary they were acting, they both laughed.
さん。やったね。
イエーイ。
They high-fived.
兄、かっこよかったよ。
Hey, Hotaru, you came too, huh?
やっぱすげえなお前らは。マジでしびれたぜ。
Thanks.
今度俺たちも乗せてくれよな。
乗ってみたい。
Anytime.
見せてもらったわ、水瀬くん。
Akari.
先生方に逆らってあなたたちを承認した私の目に狂いはなかったわね。
I really hope they took a picture. I'm glad we could prove ourselves. Everyone came by wanting to say something. I saw Tatsuya at the edge of the crowd. Tatsuya! When I waved at him, he sheepishly came closer. Tatsuya, did you see it?
ああ、もちろんだ。かっこよかったぞ、葵。
After being complimented, I could feel myself begin to blush.
ありがとな。
Thanks.
こっちのことだよ。
He started to pat me on the head. Hey, I'm not a kid!
悪い悪い。つい癖でな。
He did it again. Hey, stop it! Lots of people I had never met before kept coming up and saying how amazing and wonderful it was. Kotori and I felt overjoyed to be able to share this moment with so many people. After a while, when the crowd's energy had subsided,
小鳥、
お父さん。
her father and Hibari walked over to her.
すまなかった。空を飛びたいというお前の真剣な気持ちを遊びだと言ってすまなかった。
Kotori's father gave her a deep, apologetic bow.
お父さん。
ひばりと一緒に見ていたよ。お前が飛ぶ姿とあの美しい空を。
There was a sparkle of excitement in his eyes. He seemed to be just as excited as everyone else in the crowd.
私はお前にまた嘘をつかせてしまうところだったんだな。
そんなことない。お父さんは私のことを思って言ってくれてたんだもん。
Her father shook his head.
私は怖かったんだ。お前がまた傷つく姿を見るのが。けどそれはお前を大切に思うこととは違っていた。頑張っている娘を応援しようともせず、カゴの中へ閉じ込めようとしていた。すまなかった。
Kotori stared at her father's bowed head.
私こそごめんなさい。大事なことを黙っていて。お父さんたちがどんなに心配するか分かってたのに。
いいんだ。そうさせてしまったのは私たちだ。お前はもう自分の翼で飛べる。なのにそれを認めようとしなかったのだから。
As her father spoke, tears began to well in Kotori's eyes. But instead of crying, she began to smile.
早く帰ろう。
え？
だってお母さんが待ってるんでしょ。早く安心させてあげたい。
いいのか？
夏休みの間だけなら。
ああ、そうしてくれると嬉しい。車を取ってくるよ。
He sprinted off towards the car. He was so happy that he nearly tumbled over a rock as he ran.
お姉ちゃんもいっぱい心配かけてごめんなさい。
そんなことはいいのよ。小鳥ちゃんが無事なら。
どうだった？見てくれてたんでしょ？
ええ、かっこよかったわ。さすがは私の小鳥ちゃんだわ。ちょっと怖かったけど。
慣れればどうってことないわ。あ、そうだ。今度後ろに乗せてあげる。
Kotori's big grin seemed to draw a smile out of Hibari.
ちょっとお父さんとお話ししてくるわね。
As Hibari said that, Kotori began looking around for someone. What's wrong?
いた。
Kotori sped over to the person she had been looking for.
あまねちゃん。
いやー、小鳥。
見ててくれた？
ああ、見てたぞ。あんまり高いからよく見えなかったけどな。
飛んだよ。私たちモーニンググローリーを。
あ、
すごく綺麗だった。あまねちゃんにも見せてあげたかったな。
私はいいよ。雲の上から下を見るなんて想像しただけでゾッとするぞ。
Imagine being the head of the soaring club for 8 years and being afraid of heights. Imagine.
なんでよ。あまねちゃんの夢だったんでしょ？
私じゃない。いつかの夢だ。それにもう叶った。君たちが叶えてくれた。いつかと飛ぶはずだったあのグライダーをあの場所まで運んでくれたんだから。
Kotori gave me a timid look. Her eyes seemed to be asking what was going on. I answered with a nod and a smile. Kotori grinned to herself.
じゃあこれでいいんだね。
ありがとう、小鳥。葵くん。
As Amane cracked a smile, Kotori broke into full laughter.
ねえ、葵。
Yeah?
ちょっとの間だけ東京に帰るね。
That's a good idea. Let your parents spoil you for a while.
そうする。寂しいからって浮気しちゃダメよ。
Like I'd do that.
お父さん、どうしたの？
いつの間にか小鳥は自分の居場所を自分で作っていたんだな。
そうね。梶ヶ浦の人たちはみんな親切でいい人ばかりよ。
ああ、私たちはもっと強くならないといけないのかもしれない。小鳥を見守る親として。小さなカゴの中に押し込めてしまうにはあの子の翼は大きすぎるんだ。
What a beautiful metaphor.
いつまでも悲しんでばかりはいられないわ。私たちも前へ進まないと。
ああ、
お父さん、お姉ちゃん、早く帰ろう。帰りましょう。
ああ。
With that, Kotori got into the car and the family drove off. However, our suspension had been issued on the last day of summer vacation, so Kotori stayed at home throughout it. The days passed. Kotori, wake up! Breakfast is ready! Hey, Kotori!
おはよう。今何時？
It's 7:42. Breakfast is ready. Come on, get changed and come eat.
いただきます。
Fully awake, Kotori began chowing down on her breakfast.
はい、ハト。
Hattie went over to Kotori and started eating something. I know you don't like vegetables, but don't feed them to Hattie.
急いでるからよ。
How did you sleep in late? Didn't you set your alarm?
久しぶりに学校行けると思ったら興奮しちゃって、昨日の夜よく眠れなかったのよ。
Apparently, by the time she was able to get to sleep, she went ahead and slept right through the alarm. Today, our suspension was finally over. Our extra long summer vacation was now over, and our second semester was starting late.
おはようございます、小鳥先輩。おはようございます、ハバネ先輩。おはよう、双子
ゴシスターズ、今日もよく似てるわね。
お寝坊ですか？珍しいですね。
体内時計が狂ってるみたいなのよ。定額になって単位落としてるのに遅刻とかしちゃシャレになんないわ。
You've got a bit of bedhead. I pointed this out to her as she was shoveling food into her mouth. With bowl and chopsticks still in hand, she leaned her head towards me. Ah, you're hopeless. After grabbing a brush from the bathroom, I started to fix Kotori's hair. Huh. You've really got nice hair.
そうでしょう。自慢のサラサラヘアですから。あた、引っかかってる。
Sorry.
もう注意してよね。葵だって嫌でしょ。私の髪が枝毛だらけになっちゃったら。
That would be terrible.
相変わらず容赦のないベタベタっぷりね。朝から殺意を催しそうだわ。いいと思うな、私。ちょっと羨ましいけど。
ごちそうさま。
I'll clean up. You go get ready. Come on, there's no time.
ラジャー。
I got behind Kotori's wheelchair as we exited the building. Let's go! Hold on tight!
飛ばせー。
待ってくださいよ、先輩。そして相変わらずの無茶っぷり。エネルギーが有り余ってるわね。
I wonder what's the rush. Going back to school for the first time in what felt like ages, we were greeted as if we were heroes.
あ、ソアリング部だ。ハバネさんたち帰ってきた。あ、なになに？写真見たよ。すごい綺麗だった。
I guess I did take pictures.
私らも呼んでほしかった。
The entire class began to gather around us. Suddenly, a huge crowd had formed as students from other classes made their way in as well.
おはよう、お二人さん。
ハゲハ、これ何なの？
定額になってる間に私らのことが話題になってたみたい。こないだ見に来てた人の中にうちの学校の新聞部もいたらしくてさ。
Oh, cool.
ついでに飛岡先生に逆らって定額ってのが新鮮で刺激的だったんだよ。
How heroic of them. Students rarely got suspended at our school. It wasn't really a school where the bad kids go. Most students had easygoing, trouble-free years. However, students were talking about our suspension as if we were heroes.
ようやく時代が私たちに追いついてきたか。
Don't get too cocky. Being suspended isn't something to be proud of.
分かってるわよ。気分よ、気分。
ところで部長、その騒ぎのおかげで入部希望者が続々と集まってるんですが。
Kotori's eyes sparkled.
どうする？部員入れる気あるの？
いいわ。ただし生半可な気持ちじゃダメよ。
ほほう。というと？
入部資格は空に恋してるかどうか。そうじゃない人は残念だけど仲間とは認められないわ。
そんなやつはあんただけだ。
That's right. Don't lump us in with that. It's embarrassing.
なんでよ。みんな恋してないの？
Putting aside Kotori's silly talk for a second, the Soaring Club was in a strange position right now. It goes without saying that Mr. Tobioka had been working to keep the Soaring Club shut down. Things were supposed to have just run their course. However, the situation had turned out quite different. The Morning Glory had become a local news story in Kazagora. It was different from 27 years ago when the internet and digital cameras weren't widespread. A number of videos taken by the crowd even ended up on the TV news. That's right, some students flew a mysterious cloud formation and a homemade glider. The local media contacted the school for a comment. This led to the principal and board of school directors learning about us. The chairman of the board, Asa and Yorlu's grandfather, seemed to be appreciative of all the praise the school was getting. As a result, the abolishment of the club was postponed. A lot of suggestions came up, such as inviting in specialists from outside the club, as well as getting more members. The school itself was now expanding into aerospace engineering studies as well, which very likely played a part too. It wasn't just the teachers. The students who came to watch that day also started up a petition against abolishing the club. In the petition, Akari had written all about what we had done throughout the year and everything that had led up to that flight. On the other hand, I couldn't believe she had written that report. But on the other, it felt great to have her as an ally. Because of all this, we found ourselves in a strange position. Now that we had flown the Morning Glory, we didn't really have another goal. But all of this was lost in the commotion.
いいんじゃないかな。新入部員興味持ってくれてるんなら。そうよね。これからは今までみたいにシャニムに頑張るって感じじゃなくなるだろうし。
Just occurred to me, I really hope this this epilogue isn't like 5 hours long. Wouldn't a laid-back soaring club be just as good? That was, of course, if the club could still exist. After school that day, as we were chatting and walking down the hall to leave, we saw a familiar face in front of the elevator.
あまねちゃんだ。
やあ、君たち。
こんにちは。
Amane and Akari were chatting.
何してるの？あまねちゃん。
違うぞ、小鳥。あまねちゃんではなく、望月先生だ。
新型風車開発プロジェクトの特別講義が今日からだったのよ。ああ、例の。
Are you taking the class, Akari?
ええ。
Only a limited number of students could get in. It was very competitive, but not surprising that Akari got in.
あまねちゃんも偉くなったもんね。あんたはいつまでも偉そうだな。
I heard about the petition, Akari. Thanks for all your help.
礼を言われるほどのことでもないわ。私は私の信念に基づいて行動しているだけだから。あれだけの実績を残した部がなくなるなんて、慶風学園にとって損失以外の何者でもありませんからね。
Kotari seemed proud of what Akari was saying. She had received a lot of compliments today and was starting to get cocky.
じゃあ、あまねちゃん顧問続けてよ。また一緒に飛びたい。
それはごめんだ。
Amane spoke bluntly and laughed. Kotari frowned.
なんでよ。
もう飛ぶのはゴリゴリだ。それに私も一応大人だから責任は取らないといけない。
Amane was the one who had taken responsibility for Kotari's accident. Basically, the Soaring Club was losing its representative. It was unfortunate, but probably for the best. This would take away all of her responsibility for the glider.
寂しい。
でも君たちが飛び続けるなら時々覗かせてもらうつもりだ。君たちと何かするのは楽しいからな。
Amane's honesty shocked us. Akari actually seemed a bit jealous of us.
じゃあな、君たち。
さようなら、先輩。またね、望月先生。
Goodbye.
ただいま。
We headed back to the dormitory straight after school.
わわ。ただいま、ハット。今おやつあげるからね。はあ。
Kotari headed off to the dining hall to get Hattie's food. Seems like we're the first ones back. As we were no longer suspended, the others had club or were still on the way home. No one else was around. Returning to my room, I put down my bag and started changing out of my school uniform. It sure is hot for September. I guess I'll change my t-shirt. Huh? All of a sudden, Kotori was peeking through my slightly open door. Hey! When did you become a peeping Tom?
いいじゃない、ちょっとくらい。
Right, that's what they all say.
部活がないと暇ね。
Saying this, Kotori began poking through my bookshelf. That's because we pretty much spent every free minute in the club this year. I didn't realize how busy it kept us until it was suddenly gone. Busy, sure, but it was so very fulfilling. While we were talking, I decided to just change my t-shirt. Literally saying stare. What? Kotori was looking at my naked upper body.
いや、なんか前よりムキムキになってない？
Have I? I wasn't sure how to respond, but I couldn't help but feel a little happy. Actually, I started cycling again after getting suspended.
そうなの？
That night that I chased after you, I almost overdid it though. My knee started hurting again. Kotori began to look extremely worried. I went to the hospital and got it checked out. They said it was nothing to worry over. They said as long as I didn't overdo it, it'd be alright for me to ride. It'd be fine as long as I didn't race, they said. So, since I haven't been getting much exercise, I started going out on little excursions.
へえ。
There's really nothing else to do. The school was still deciding what to do about the soaring club, and the winch was still being repaired. Letting out a sigh that said nothing about her feelings, Kotori stared at the bicycle in the corner of my room. How is home?
まあまあかな。
I still hadn't heard the details of her time at home. Kotori only came back late last night. This was the first time we had been together since then. How's your mother doing?
もうすっかり元気。倒れたって聞いた時はびっくりしたけど、うちのお母さん大げさなところあるから。私の顔見た1時間後にはキッチンに立ってご飯作ってたわよ。まったく人の気も知らないでさ。
This was the mother who Kotori had decided to quit school and go home for. Well, that's just because she worries about you, right? Did you talk to her about the glider?
全部話したわ。そしたらまた倒れそうになってた。
Sheesh.
でもまあお父さんもひばり姉も加勢してくれて、なんとか納得してくれたような、そうでもないような。もうちょいかかるかな。
Considering how she sounded, I doubt she'd be so easily persuaded. One could only stick to being persistent. And they're going to let you stay here?
そこはバッチリ。何せお父さんがそうした方がいいって言ってくれたから。
Wow. Hard to believe he'd say that after how much he wanted to take her back home before.
モーニンググローリーの奇跡のような光景を見て、きっと心が洗われたのね。
She was completely serious. I guess that could be the case. Just seeing it had been really inspiring for many people. But surely witnessing your own daughter reach her goals must have been an even more amazing feeling.
その代わり、私が定期的に帰省することと、お父さんたちが時々こっちに遊びに来ることになったから。
Really? Well, that's good, especially since you're not that far of a drive away.
それと、お父さんがね、葵のことを褒めてた。
About me? She nodded.
彼はなかなか見どころのある若者だって。
Oof. That's kind of embarrassing.
お母さんも会ってみたいって言ってたから、今度連れてきてもいい？
Oh? Yeah, sure.
きっと気に入ると思うわ。葵、背が高くてかっこいいから。
I was going to meet her mother. Even though it had just been a casual meeting, it still made me nervous.
この間、この自転車に乗ってる葵、初めて見たけど、超かっこよかった。しびれるくらい
私の王子様って感じ。また好きになっちゃったわ。
She turned red and started to look nervous.
あんまりかっこいいから、この間なんて夢に見ちゃったくらいよ。
Really? What kind of dream?
いや、それは内緒です。
Good night, everybody. What? You won't tell me?
ダメ、企業秘密。
What company? Kochiri came closer and gazed at me.
こんなかっこいい男の子が私の彼氏だなんてまだ信じられないわ。何かの手違いじゃないかしら。
What do you mean, mistake? Do you still think I don't care about you?
じゃあ会えない間に私の夢見た？見てないんだ。やっぱり好きじゃないんだ。
I did! Of course I did!
じゃあなんで即答できないわけ？別に私に恋焦がれてなかったんでしょ？
You just can't win. You just can't win. That's after her saying she couldn't tell me about her dream because it was a company secret. Perhaps I got a little stubborn myself. However, Kochiri looked at me with teary eyes.
本当に見た？
I did, really.
どんな夢？
Well, it was, I knelt down and looked Kochiri in the eyes. I kissed her. This kind of dream.
それだけ？
Are you saying you don't know what happened?
わかんないよ。
I brought her body close to mine.
葵。
Kochiri hugged me back. You win. You win. When I met you in my dream, this is what you did. You were just as strong as you are right now.
嬉しくて死にそう。
What about your dream?
私も同じ。夢の中でもこんな感じ。幸せで死にそうだったわ。
This isn't a dream. I'm here.
私もいる。
I'm really happy.
私も幸せ。うわ、好きすぎてどうにかなっちゃいそう。
Kochiri, whatever happens, I'll always love you. You don't have to worry.
ずっと好きでいてくれる？
Of course I will.
私も。
Kochiri.
葵。
All of our emotions flew through our kiss.
葵、大好き。
Hattie cheerfully pecked around in the garden grass.
ハットー、行くよー。それ。
She began to spray water from the hose at the duck.
気持ちよさそう。
When Kochiri had finished, Hattie waddled over to her. I sat down as well. At that moment, we both looked up to see clouds slowly drifting across the blue sky. I want to fly. Whenever I looked up to the sky, I got that feeling. Especially when I was with Kochiri.
ねえ、葵。あの時、迎えに来てくれてありがとう。
Hmm? No problem.
サイに気づいてくれないんじゃないかって思ってた。
She was talking about the SOS she had sent. The plain, nondescript paper airplane. I didn't get it at first, but then I remembered the first time we met.
本当はあんなサイン出すつもりなかったんだけど気がついたら紙飛行機を折ってお姉ちゃんに渡してた。
Kochiri asking me to help her was basically her choosing flying over her family. That is not something she could have done. Instead, she put her feelings into that paper airplane and had me go to her.
葵が気づいてくれたおかげでモーニンググローリーを飛ぶことができた。もし葵がいなかったら私は今ここにいないだろうし、多分空を見上げることももうできなくなってたと思う。
Why? That's the one thing she said she could do.
きっと高い高い空を見上げるたびに飛べない自分を思い知らされてたと思うの。そうしてそのうち見上げることもやめてしまってたと思う。でももう私は飛んだし自分は飛べるんだって知ってる。他の普通の人たちよりも少しだけ大変かもしれないけどね。
You took your future back. At some point, Kotori had begun looking straight up at the apex of the sky. I felt like Kotori was always looking up higher than I was. Noticing her doing this, I set my eyes at the same spot hers were looking at. I had to be thankful for Kotori as well.
それでね、実はね、
She suddenly started to mumble.
もう一つお話ししなきゃいけないことがあるの。
The timid look on her face caused me to brace myself. Did something happen while you were at home? Something had happened.
なんかね、見つかったらしいの。
Found what?
手術できる病院が。
Huh? At first I didn't know what she was talking about. I know! Come on out, you dunce! But when I realized a moment later, I could barely believe it. By surgery, you mean... I looked down at Kotori's legs. She nodded. She then stretched out an arm towards me. I took her hand in my own. It was trembling slightly. Are you scared? Kotori nodded.
もしダメだったら確率 0% になっちゃうもん。
Losing the possibility of recovery was the same as losing all hope. It would be better to have that hope, even if it wasn't real. It's okay. I'll be there with you. Nothing would change, even if it didn't work. But Kotori shook her head.
無理よ。
Why?
アメリカだから。
Huh?
手術を受けるにはアメリカに行かなきゃいけないの。
Oh, I see. For a moment, I thought about going with her.
怖いけど頑張ってくるね。
She sounded so anxious as she gazed at me with tear-filled eyes.
私やっぱり葵と手をつないでデートしたいから。
I was shocked to hear this news, shocked to the point of trembling, but I concealed my feelings and held Kotori's shaking hand. The surgery wouldn't be happening right away, though. Kotori's situation wasn't urgent, and since it was a famous doctor, there was a waiting list. In the meantime, Kotori got her passport and school leave sorted out. She went to America 2 months later. The surgery was a success. Feelings returned to Kotori's legs. Knowing what the odds were, it was nothing short of a miracle. But the real challenge was yet to come. After returning home, she began her days of grueling rehabilitation. Once again, she found herself feeling the pain of not being able to do the things she could once do. However, Kotori Habane wasn't the sort to give up that easily. After months of rehabilitation, she was able to stand herself up on crutches. During that time, we had become seniors, and new freshmen had started at Keifu. Then, just around the time when summer was about to end, today would be my first flight in a long time. When I arrived at the runway, someone was already waiting there. Oh, man. Standing there on crutches, she looked so mature. After a sudden wind blew her long hair, she tucked it behind her ears. She looked completely natural. Almost like there was a twinkle in her eyes. I watched her as she gazed out at the far-reaching horizon. I want to fly right now. I heard it in my head as clear as day. Hey! You're already here.
コンディションを見ておこうと思って。
Seems pretty good.
気持ちのいい風が吹いてきたわ。いいサーマルも出てそうだし。絶好のフライト日和ね。
Yeah. The end of summer is the one time a year when vertical drafts are most likely to occur. A clear day like today really was the best for flying. You're going to fly today, right?
1年どもに空を飛ぶことの何たるかを教えてやらないといけないからね。
Ah, quit it with that sappy talk. It's annoying.
嘘、なんでよ。
Well, you know there just aren't many people like you who say that they love the sky.
最近の若いもんは。
3 years younger than us, and you sure can feel the generation gap.
私らも年取ったわね。
It was a joke, but it had been 2 years since we first met. So many things had happened during that time. Too many things. It was almost impossible to believe all those things had happened in only 2 years.
後輩らにもちゃんと教えてあげなくちゃ。私らが空に憧れたような熱い気持ちをさ。
Oh yeah, that's right. The dream handed down from Amane. We spent that entire year with one goal on our mind, but it was a completely irreplaceable year. One of our dreams had been realized, yet the sky still went on higher and higher without end. By the way, Amane said she'd come by today to watch.
本当に？よーし、いいとこ見せなくっちゃ。
The grass waved as the wind cut across the runway. The wind blowing over the lake was unique to Kazagora. Our wings gave us the power to fly.
ランウェイイズクリア。ウィンチ、準備完了。
Preparations are all done here.
よーし、行くわよ、小鳥。いいわよ、あげて。
We were flying. We spread out our white wings and flew through the vast blue sky. And I assume that's the true end? Yes. Ah, just when I thought it couldn't get any better. What a beautiful way to end a beautiful game. Let's see if we can't find... I was kind of hoping the key visual of Kotori at the very end would be here somewhere, but I don't see it, so... There we go. That, ladies and gentlemen, was If My Heart Had Wings. I'm so glad that I've been given the opportunity to play this. Oh man, I'm gonna keep playing this, but on my own. This was the final stream of this game, so I will be back on Tuesday to play something else, and I'll be back next Sunday to, I'll probably work on Crimson Spires. I think I'm closest to finishing that game of the ones that I want to finish up, so probably swap back to that. Oh man, what an absolutely gorgeous, gorgeous game. I'm so happy that I got to play this. I'm so glad this game was even made. Hard to believe this game is literally almost a decade old now. But it's just so timeless and gorgeous, and man, I'm looking forward to... Oh man, I'm out of words. Thank you to everyone who has given this series a watch, even just a quick glance. It just has meant so much to share this journey with all of you. Yep, see you on Tuesday, Leandro. Remember to pick this game up. It is now available on all consoles and Steam, so you have no excuse not to play it for yourselves. Excuse me. She got to walk. Oh man. Okay. I have to end it now. On behalf of East Asia Soft, I have been Skull. Have yourselves a great day and a great week and a great 2022, and I will see you all next time. Bye-bye.